Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, Pat Buchanan. Tonight, outrageous fortune. In the Crossfire, consumer advocate Ralph Nader and Jim Glassman, host of Money Politics.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. How much money did you make last year? Craig McCaw made $53 million. Who's Craig McCaw? He's head of a cellular telephone company, and he was America's best-paid corporate executive in 1989. Forbes and Businessweek magazines have just published their annual lists of executive pay. According to Forbes, the top 800 corporate executives averaged $1.8 million each last year. But so what? These men run large organizations. Jack Nicholson made more than $30 million for playing the Joker in Batman. Michael Jackson got $65 million last year for whatever it is he does. The pay of corporate big shots, is it a scandal or is it a reasonable price for valuable services rendered? Overpaid Bob Novak is sitting in for Pat Buchanan. Bob?
Mr. Nader, let me try to get this straight. Are you saying you want the clowns in the U.S. government to set wage controls for businessmen to say how much money they can get? Is that what you want?
I am shocked, Mr. Novak, by the leading question which you've put before me. I would like the owners, the shareholders, to pass on the outrageous executive salaries that have ballooned in the last 10 years. Top U.S. corporation executives are making 4 to 6 times more than their Japanese and West German counterparts, and they have flubbed it. They've dropped the ball.
Hey.
The defense industry, the savings and loan industry. Let me just put it this way. What would you pay Roger Smith, who presided over a decline in market share of GM from 45 to 34%,
you read my mind.
Overcharged consumers, didn't put airbags in cars, exposed workers to hazards, and turns around and wants $600 an hour in retirement for the rest of his life?
You read my mind, Mr. Nader, because I was just thinking of Roger Smith. GM, unlike a lot of corporations, put it up to a vote of the shareholders, whether he would get the pension. And except for the socialist-owned part of the sector, the Michigan State Pension Fund, which voted no, the rest of the owners of GM stock said okay. So it's none of your business, Mr. Nader. You can talk about congressional pay, but Roger Smith is not your business.
Well, since I would like to advise the shareholders of General Motors that
they don't want your advice.
Oh.
Buy some stock, Ralph. Buy a couple million shares.
Free speech. When they say that the American people shouldn't have adequate bumpers on cars to lower their auto insurance rates, safety in cars to save their families' lives, so they can pay the likes of Roger Smith in retirement for doing nothing, $600 an hour, that is what sheds the leadership quality of big business in this country. When they say workers depress your wages, sacrifice to meet the Korean competition, but us, we want 90 times more than the entry-level worker in this country. It went from 45 to 90 times the entry-level worker's wage in this country. That's leadership by double standard. It destroys morale and it destroys productivity.
Jim, you know, you've met some of these guys, these top corporate executives. In fact, I think I've met a couple of them with you. Can you really look me in the eye and tell me they're so smart and so hardworking that they're worth $2 million a year, that they're really that much smarter, that much harder working than you are, for example?
Well, of course, not as much as I am, but it seems to me that there are some who are hardworking and some who are not hardworking. But the fact is that there are very, very few, unfortunately, terrific managers in this country. And we have a system here called capitalism where we attract people to good jobs by offering them money. And I think that's about the best way you can do it.
But you're not saying that the free market is really working at maximum efficiency in sorting out who's a good manager, who's not a good manager, how much the good one should be paid, how much the bad one should be paid. Let's not talk theory, let's talk practice. Look at the landscape. Look at these guys you've met and tell me that a lot of them aren't bozos making $1 million a year.
I think indeed some of them are bozos, and a lot of the bozos, in fact, are getting their companies bought out from under them, and I wish there were more of that, and I'm sorry about what's happened, in fact, in the junk bond market. We want to bring that up, because that's one way to put a lot of discipline on corporations. But there are definitely good managers. I mean, one of them is Eisner from from Walt Disney, who last year was paid $9 million, but he took his company from $100 million in profit to $500 million. He employed many, many more people than used to be employed. I think the guy ought to be rewarded.
Yeah, Mr. Nader, don't you...
How about the workers in Disney? Do they get a big bonus too?
I'm glad you said it, because you're anticipating out my every question,
Of course, I know you cold,
because don't you think Mr. Eisner, who probably gets up, like most executives, most CEOs get up about 4:35 in the morning. They work very long and hard hours.
So do dairy farmers.
But they have a lot less tension.
Well, they don't get the subsidies that dairy farmers do either, you know.
Don't you think they deserve a much bigger salary than an ordinary guy playing Mickey Mouse at Disneyland? Don't you? I mean, seriously.
The question is, do they deserve 500 times more?
Well,
400?
who's to say? Are you to say?
Yeah, they are setting their own salary. I'm glad you mentioned it. Top corporate executives in the Fortune 300.
That's the American way.
They handpick the board of directors. They handpick the board of directors. And then the board of directors rubber stamps their salaries. In other words, these top moguls are not throwing their salaries open for the market verdict. They are being rubber stamped by the board of directors, which they handpick.
Jim, that's how it really works, isn't it? There's this thing called the Compensation Committee on these corporations, which is composed of outside directors who don't work for the company. They supposedly set the salary, but they are executives of other corporations.
Look, there's no,
and they know that their salary is going to be based on the average salary in the industry. Everyone has an incentive to inflate these salaries.
Look,
this
Mike,
isn't the free market.
Everyone knows that there is no pure democracy in corporations. Okay, I mean, we can all grant that. But the fact is that there's no better system that I know of for setting these salaries than to have the corporate shareholders elect the board of directors, which then sets the salaries for the corporate. Who should do it? I mean,
why
not open it up?
Congress do
No,
it?
the shareholders. Open up.
I want to ask
the shareholders.
98% of the cases, the board of directors, rubber stamped by the executives, set the salaries for executives. You want to open up to the shareholders?
Mr. Nader, do you see the shareholders across America rioting in the streets of Detroit and Chicago saying, we don't want to pay those salaries? I don't hear any complaints from the shareholders.
You haven't been reading the papers. Last week, major institutional shareholders have indicated they're going to vote no against General Motors paying
the socialist owners, that's all.
Listen, let me ask you this. If you were running General Motors, would you pay Roger Smith in retirement $600 an hour?
Well, he put in a lot of hard service for General Motors.
The company declined.
I don't own
Jim, you yourself have written for the New Republic, the magazine we both worked for, a very good article about what a lousy company General Motors was and how it was going to hell under Roger Smith.
I agree.
So now they've gone and doubled his pension.
Look,
what's he going to do?
Their business.
What's he going to do? What's he going to do? Retire from another company?
No, there's no doubt about it. It is their business. I don't approve of what happened with Roger Smith, but I think we can see the same pattern with baseball players, where when salary negotiations come up, they get these tremendous salaries that go on for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and they get retirement benefits that are all built in when they're at their height. And then, they sort of go into decline. So it's not a perfect system, but I think it works pretty well.
I just want to get straight, Mr. Nader, the fact that these institutional investors that are complaining are, in fact, the Michigan State Pension Fund, which is the left-wing government of the state of Michigan. Is that not correct?
And some mutual funds, too. Do you think they're left-wing, too?
No, but they're the ones that are making the fuss. Let's put it where
mutual funds. Let's put it this way. Do you like the views of Peter Drucker and Irving Kristol?
They're not always right.
Well, they have sharply criticized the morale debilitating, outrageous self-anointed salaries of these executives at a time when they're paying themselves 4 to 6 times their Japanese and West German competition and running their companies, if not into the ground, to Washington for bailouts and inflated government contracts. Now, just a moment.
I don't know who's going to take a break.
Drucker said 25 times more should be the limit by published corporate policy of what top executives pay themselves compared to the entry-level workers.
You were running a corporation, you'd have a standard like that because you're a very sensible guy, wouldn't you?
I wouldn't have a fixed standard of 25 times. Although, I do think that the CEO should make an outrageous amount more than their salary people do.
We're going to have to take a break, and when we come back, we'll try to say whether the revolution in Eastern Europe has some lessons for Ralph Nader.
Napa, because there are no unimportant parts.
TCBY frozen yogurt is the greatest in the universe. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I wonder if Mars is still open.
Food! We got hot food, huge food, happy food, and dude food. We got lunch food, munchin' and munch food, not in the greatest mood food. We got the right food, light food, morning food, and night food, make-a-wish food, not this food. All right, food, we got food. Folks and fun. Get it to go food. Food, folks and fun. Hey, get your own food. You know the one. It's McDonald's for food, folks and fun.
Tonight on Larry King Live, they claim it's a church. The judge says it's a prostitution ring. Plus, our man at the White House, Don Rickles. Tonight, Larry King Live, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Welcome back. We're talking about the mega bucks take-home pay for America's corporate executives with Jim Glassman, the editor of the newspaper Roll Call, and with consumer advocate Ralph Nader. Mr. Nader, did you get any kind of lesson whatsoever out of the Eastern European Revolution, where they decided that setting the pay for executives, setting the pay for the scoundrels who ran those plants was not a good idea, that the market should control?
It's obviously a lesson you didn't learn, because the lesson from Eastern Europe was rewarding bureaucrats running these firms for failure. In this country, these top executives with their rubber stamp board of directors pay themselves whether they profit for the company or fail for the company. Look at the gigantic salaries of the savings and loans before they came to Washington for a taxpayer bailout. Look at the defense manufacturers full of waste, fraud, and abuse and jacking their executive salaries up. Look at the auto companies, can't even compete with Japan and West Germany, and yet they're pressing the auto workers' wages down while they increase their wages. No, in other words, here's my point. The lesson from Eastern Europe that we must learn in this country is corporate executives, self-set, should not reward failure. Capitalism means risk or profit, doesn't it?
I want you to answer before this program is over. I've asked it about 2 different ways. I'm going to ask it a third way. Do you think the government should set some kind of standard, some kind of kind of restriction, such as a limit, a percentage of profit, some kind of cockamamie standard? Do you think that?
I think the government should cut its own salaries in Congress and top executive level.
We agree on that.
Secondly, and here's the difference. This is going to surprise you. It's not an unqualified no. When the government is forcing taxpayers to bail out corporate mismanagement, speculation, and crooks like in the savings and loan, they should, when they bail out defense manufacturers with inflated secondary defense contracts, they should not allow, with the taxpayer subsidizing these people, they should not allow unfettered salary increases.
Socialism. That's socialism.
That's socialism. That's taxpayer accountability. You'd have the taxpayer bail out these companies.
Let me get Jim in here for a bit. Doesn't Ralph have a point? You know, a lot of these American companies paying these top salaries are not really in the free market. Take Mr. Number One, Craig McCaw. His company is worth so much because he's got a government-granted monopoly on cellular telephones. According to, I think it was Forbes or Business, one of the two, the best-paying industry in this country is healthcare, where a lot of their money comes from Medicare and the crazy system we have for reimbursing healthcare in this country. So it's really not right. These people aren't courageous explorers in the free market.
Well,
they're socialists.
Look, Mike, I agree with you. I agree with you. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. I think the FCC
Let's take number one.
I think the FCC should auction off those licenses.
It's ludicrous that this guy made $53 million from a government monopoly he got for free.
I agree, but let's
made no money.
McCaw paid himself something like $250,000. But the stock options went up because the stock market valued his company as being worth a whole lot more money. The question I'd like to ask Ralph is, it seems to me that if someone is successful if a CEO is successful at driving his company, as Eisner is, and as there are many other examples, how much should he be rewarded?
Well, there should be some balance between how much he rewards the workers. So they should go up together. Wait.
Kind of waffling, aren't you?
No, wait.
It seems to me that American corporations are failing to compete against the Japanese. The answer is not to cut corporate salaries. No. It's exactly the opposite. The answer is to raise corporate salaries, to get better people.
Are you getting better people? Let's put it this way. In 1980, the average top corporate salary was 45 times the entry-level worker. It's now 90.
The reason
are we getting better workers?
Let me tell you why you don't get better people.
You're damaging worker productivity.
You hit on it a little while ago, which is that there is not pure corporate democracy.
Pure?
The reason is that managers do control companies. What I'd like to see is managers not controlling companies as much.
But
leave managers exposed to takeovers.
But Jim, you haven't answered Ralph's question, which is you say we need to pay corporate managers more. He says the pay of corporate managers relative to workers has doubled since 1980. During this wonderful takeover movement you've been saying was so great, is the corporate management twice as good now as it was in 1980? You sure don't think so.
I certainly do think so in certain areas. There's no doubt about it. And you talk about automobiles, which are still not doing very well. But certainly those companies are far better managed than they were 10 years ago.
Mr. Novak, why do you always come out on the side of the corporate big shots and don't recognize that the fiber and success of capitalism in this country is a worker productivity level that can look up to their leaders and not have their leaders say, you press your salaries down, workers, but we're going up into the stratosphere.
Mr. Nader, because you've never really been a worker, I don't think you understand the American worker and the difference between them and the Eastern European worker. Isn't it true that in Eastern Europe, when somebody makes a little money under the communist system, they say, take that money away from them, up until this revolution. But in America, when somebody makes a buck, the American worker says, good for him, I hope I'm there next week. Isn't that the real attitude?
Again, a red herring, to coin a phrase. Here's what I'm concerned about. Do you think it's fair for industrial worker wages to have been stagnant? In other words, real adjusted for inflation, they haven't increased since 1973, while corporate salaries and inflation adjusted have tripled? I mean, first of all, if you were head of a company, do you think you could get the kind of productivity? I think the reason why productivity is faster in Japan and West Germany is because the top executives in Japan...
Have you seen what they make in Japan, the top executives?
Yes, they make one-third to one-sixth.
They may make less, but they bow to them. Would you like a Japanese system where you have to bow to the guy who's running the company?
Here it is, according to Business Week. Top U.S. corporate executives, 1.9 million average. Wait. 1.9 million average. Japanese top executives, including perks and benefits, 350,000. Who's getting more? They're taking us to lunch.
Okay, we got to take another break on that. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about Michael Jackson and Jack Nicholson, and why are they paid so much? And why isn't anybody complaining about that?
Hair dye?
Hair dye.
Motor oil?
Motor oil.
When we say Genesis carpets certified by Amoco resist almost anything, we aren't kidding. In fact, we prove Genesis resists stains that leading nylon carpets can't. And now during your Genesis Carpet Dealer's Challenge, you can prove the ultimate stain and fade resistance yourself. Genesis. Call for a free test sample and the participating Genesis dealer nearest you.
What's your first priority? Miss Crowley.
Well, I'm assuming there's product in the pipeline, so...
Assuming, Miss Crowley. Unfortunately, assuming doesn't feed the bulldog.
The top business schools prepare you for every eventuality you will ever encounter in the business world, except one, business travel. We've got that one covered. United. Come fly the friendly skies.
How can Miss Crowley's three-person sales force stay on top of her far-flung enterprise?
Citizen ProMaster Diver's Chronograph, digital depth sensor, elapsed dive time alarm.
So, exactly how long have you been a diver?
Citizen ProMaster, for professional use only.
Tonight, should a city council be able to tell you to read the Bible, or is it none of their business?
The Constitution says you not only have the freedom of religion, you have the freedom from religion.
On CNN's Prime News, 8 Eastern tonight.
Jim, Michael Jackson made $65 million last year. Sports people, Patrick Ewing, I think, made about $30 million, something like that. There's really a difference, isn't there? Michael Jackson's income is based very directly on how many records he sells, how many tickets he sells. The connection between the free market, between the consumer demand, what the consumer is willing to pay, and what an entertainment or sports figure receives is much more direct and much more real than it is in the case of these corporate executives, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. It's very difficult, I think, to set a compensation package that directly reflects how you're performing. But, you know, we keep coming back to Eisner. They did that at Disney.
No, you keep coming back to Eisner.
I do. In fact, I do. Where he's compensated based on return on equity for the company. I don't want to get into all these details, but I think that's a very good system.
Look, Eisner's the best case for your side. He turned around that company and made a lot of money. That's fine. But
and there's dozens of people like Eisner.
But there's dozens of bozos too, aren't there?
Yes.
But that's the way the system works.
Well, bozos don't get paid $2 million.
You think corporation executives, these corporate bureaucrats, should get salaries increase when their company's going downhill?
Mr. Nader,
when the company's going downhill?
It's not your business. You should stick to taking care of the congressman. You shouldn't get into the private sector. Let me ask you this. Do you resent Mike Tyson, who just lost his title, getting $55 million in the last couple of years?
You know who Mike Tyson is?
Yeah.
Do you resent that?
That's a volunteer. People want to pay to watch that, fine. But when you're working in a company,
people want to buy GM cars.
No, when you're working in a company,
not enough.
When you're working in a company, what the gap between the top executives and the workers gets bigger and bigger. The workers lose. They not only lose in dollars, they lose in respect for their leaders, and the incentive for middle management is shattered.
One thing about workers,
entertainers
I think Bob is going to say the same thing I'm about to say. One thing about workers is you underestimate their belief in this system.
Right.
The fact is very, very few of them think there's something terrible going on here. They actually aspire to moving up the ladder like Lee Iacocca himself did.
I can't believe
and making this kind of
I cannot believe you're saying this. Workers who are the audience of Crossfire, call in your comments. Listen,
that's a typical Nader trick.
Wait. Do you think that workers want to have their wages frozen since 1973, while their top execs up in Executive Suite are making 90 times more?
Mr. Nader, you know, you brought up Japan, and I just am so sick of people bringing up Japan as a good example. The Japanese worker has a much lower standard of living than the American worker.
Not as much
Did you
lower,
realize that?
Not as much lower as the Japanese executive has compared to the American executive.
I'm talking about
the gap is much narrower between the boss and the worker in Japan.
But they're not,
wait.
They're not interested in the gap.
In this country, there's a shamelessness about some of these top executives. While their companies are crumbling before the foreign competition, their single-minded goals to double and triple their bonuses and
You're worried about the gap between worker and boss instead of the caliber of living, the standard of living by the worker, which is below the American worker.
Jim, last word.
Japan.
You wouldn't claim that the American worker's standard of living is due to the pay of the bosses, would you?
Partly.
No, but I think it's due to a system where people get rewarded for performance. And it's not a perfect system, but it certainly is better than anything I could ever think of.
How about failure?
All right.
They get rewarded
Stop,
for failure?
you guys. We're out of time. Thanks a lot, Jim Glassman. Thank you, Ralph Nader. Bob and I will be back in a moment.
Good evening, I'm Susan Rook. Coming up on CNN's Prime News, stars on the East and West Coast mourn the loss of Sammy Davis Jr., also mourning the loss of the Muppet Maker. And Robert Polhill survived more than 3 years as a hostage in Lebanon. Now he has throat cancer. Prime News is next. Join us.
Some people don't know it, but they're paying too much in taxes. Take these two, identical in many ways. Similar homes, similar income, similar investments. But one could be paying 28% more tax on his savings and investment income. That's over $200 on every $800 earned. The other called Fidelity Investments toll-free and found out how to invest tax-free in this free fact kit on Fidelity tax-free funds. It shows you how to earn income that's 100% free from federal income taxes. And in some states, your income may be free from state and local taxes too. And there's no sales charge, which means all your money is working for you. So call for your free fact kit on Fidelity Investments tax-free funds. Call right now and you'll also get this bonus booklet, Understanding Tax-Free Investing. See how Fidelity gives you the facts you need to make up your own mind without pressure.
Hello, Fidelity?
Keep more of what you earn. Call 1-800-328-4100 today and let Fidelity show you how.
Call now and you can have 13 weeks of the Wall Street Journal and this valuable 120-page guide to understanding money and markets. That's 13 weeks of the Journal for the news and ideas you need every business day. And this guide free, which tells you everything you want to know about money and markets, now for only $34. Call toll-free 800-638-9600. Today's Wall Street Journal. Faster, tougher, smarter. Call 800-638-9600 now.
As you watch this, your money is changing hands. To find out how and why, you need the latest business news at 15 minutes into each half hour, only on Headline News.
Bob, you pal around with a lot of corporate big shots, and they pay you a lot of money for speeches, so I know you got to be nice to them. But you know in your heart that you work a lot harder than the typical one, and you're a lot smarter than the typical one, and yet you, even with your vast income for a journalist, make a lot more than a lot of very mediocre bozos in the corporate world.
A lot less, you mean, than a lot
less
than, yeah, we'll get it right. You know, you betray your ignorance about how hard these guys work. These guys work a lot harder than you do, my friend. And I'll tell you something else. Most of them do not come from inherited wealth. Most of these corporate executives have made their own way, and we have a country, Mike, where envy has never been the overriding consideration. That's what's made it a great country, and I don't want you and your kind to change it.
When you talk about it and you like it, you call it competition and aspiration, and when you don't like it, you call it envy. What's the difference?
If you don't like it, get out.
Get out, please. From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, I'm Robert Novak. Join us again next time for another edition of Crossfire.
For a transcript, send $3 to Crossfire Transcripts, Journal Graphics, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007, or call 1-800-TALK-SHOW.